The bustling diner in small-town Indiana was a haven of warmth on a chilly autumn evening. Sarah, a young waitress with determination in her eyes, moved swiftly between tables, her ponytail swinging with each step. The bell above the door chimed, and in shuffled Jack, a weathered man in tattered clothes. His presence immediately drew stares and whispers from the other patrons. As Jack made his way to a corner booth, Sarah noticed the manager's disapproving glance. Before long, the manager approached Jack, his voice low but firm, asking him to leave. Sarah felt a pang in her chest, her grip tightening on the coffee pot she held. "Wait," she called out, surprising herself with her boldness. The manager turned, eyebrows raised. "Let me serve him, please." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded curtly and walked away. Sarah approached Jack's table, her heart racing. "Coffee?" she offered with a gentle smile. Jack looked up, his blue eyes clouded with a mix of wariness and gratitude. As she poured, Sarah noticed a small, tarnished pin on Jack's jacket, a military decoration. "You served?" she asked softly. Jack nodded, his calloused hands wrapping around the warm mug. "Long time ago," he murmured. Something in his tone made Sarah pause. She glanced around the diner, then slid into the booth across from him. "I'd like to hear about it if you're willing to share." For a moment, Jack seemed to retreat into himself, but then he met Sarah's gaze. In that instant, a connection formed, a bridge between two worlds. Jack began to speak, his voice low and gravelly, recounting tales of bravery, loss, and the weight of survival. As Sarah listened, she felt her perspective shifting, realizing that the man before her was not just a homeless veteran, but a hero whose story had been forgotten by society. As Jack's story unfolded, the diner around them seemed to fade away. He spoke of the scorching heat of Afghanistan, the constant tension that hung in the air like a heavy fog, and the bonds forged in the crucible of war. His voice cracked as he recounted the day his best friend, Mike, stepped on an IED. "I can still hear the blast," Jack whispered, his hands trembling slightly. "I was just a few feet away. Why him and not me?" Sarah listened intently, her heart aching for the pain etched into every line of Jack's face. She reached out, hesitantly placing her hand on his weathered one. "You survived for a reason, Jack," she said softly. Jack's eyes, previously distant with memories, focused on Sarah. "What about you, kid? What's your story?" Sarah took a deep breath, surprised by her willingness to open up to this stranger. She told him about her struggles, her father's battle with alcoholism that had torn their family apart, the financial pressure of being the sole provider for her younger siblings while trying to save for college. "Some days, it feels like I'm drowning," she admitted. As they shared their stories, a quiet understanding grew between them. Two souls, separated by age and experience, yet united by the weight of their responsibilities and the challenges they faced. "You're a strong one," Jack said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "It reminds me of the women I served with, tough as nails but with hearts of gold." Sarah felt a surge of emotion at his words. In that moment, she made a decision. "Jack, your story deserves to be heard. You deserve more than this. I want to help, if you'll let me." Jack's brow furrowed, a mix of hope and skepticism crossing his face. "Help? How?" "I'm not sure yet," Sarah replied, determination shining in her eyes. "But I promise you, we're going to figure it out together." That night, after her shift ended, Sarah sat at her small desk, the glow of her laptop illuminating her determined face. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she created a social media page dedicated to Jack's story. She carefully crafted a post detailing Jack's service, his struggles, and the broader issue of homeless veterans in America. "Help us honor a forgotten hero," she wrote, her heart pounding as she hit post. At first, the response was slow. A like here, a share there. But as the hours ticked by, Sarah watched in awe as the post began to gain traction. Friends shared it, then friends of friends. By morning, local community groups had picked up the story, Sarah raced to the diner for her morning shift, her mind buzzing with ideas. As she tied her apron, she scanned the booths for Jack. When she spotted him in his usual corner, she couldn't contain her excitement. "Jack!" she called, hurrying over. "You won't believe what's happening." Jack looked up, his expression guarded but curious. Sarah slid into the booth, pulling out her phone to show him the growing response to his story. "People want to help, Jack. They're asking how they can support you and other veterans like you." As Jack scrolled through the comments, Sarah saw a glimmer of something in his eyes, a spark of hope that had long been extinguished. I don't know what to say," he mumbled, clearly overwhelmed. "You don't have to say anything," Sarah assured him. "Just know that you're not alone anymore. We're going to fight this battle together." Over the next few days, the campaign continued to grow. Local news stations picked up the story, and Sarah found herself fielding calls and messages from people eager to help. The diner became a hub of activity, with patrons asking about Jack and how they could contribute. As the community rallied around Jack's cause, Sarah realized that this was just the beginning. They weren't just helping one man. They were shining a light on a systemic issue that had been ignored for too long. And in the process, both Sarah and Jack were discovering a renewed sense of purpose. The Bell's Diner, once a quiet spot for locals to grab a quick bite, had transformed into the epicenter of a movement. The worn leather booths now hosted impromptu meetings of volunteers, while the counter buzzed with discussions of fundraising ideas and outreach programs. Sarah, still in her waitress uniform, found herself at the heart of it all. She moved from table to table, connecting people, sharing ideas, and always keeping an eye on Jack, who sat in his usual spot, looking both awed and slightly overwhelmed by the attention. One crisp Saturday morning, the diner hosted its first official event, a pancake breakfast fundraiser for homeless veterans. The line stretched around the block, with people from all walks of life waiting patiently to show their support. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of coffee and syrup, and the sound of laughter and animated conversations. Local veterans, some in uniform, others in civilian clothes, shared their stories with attentive listeners. Sarah watched as people who had never given much thought to veterans' issues now leaned in, their expressions a mix of concern and determination to help. Jack, initially reluctant to be in the spotlight, found himself surrounded by fellow veterans. As they swapped stories, Sarah saw his posture change, his shoulders straightening as if a heavy weight was being lifted. "I never thought I'd see anything like this," Jack confided to Sarah during a quiet moment. "All these people, they actually care." Sarah squeezed his shoulder. "Of course they care, Jack. They just needed to be reminded of the heroes living among us." As the event wound down, a local councilwoman approached Sarah and Jack. "What you've started here is incredible," she said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I'd like to propose a town hall meeting to discuss how we can better support our veteran community. Would you both be willing to speak?" Sarah looked at Jack, silently asking for his approval. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. As they agreed to participate, Sarah realized that their small act of kindness had sparked something much larger. They weren't just changing Jack's life, they were changing their entire community's perspective on how to honor and support those who had served their country. As weeks turned into months, the changes in both Sarah and Jack became increasingly evident. Sarah, once solely focused on making ends meet, found herself thrust into the role of a community organizer and advocate. She spent her free time researching veterans' issues, reaching out to local politicians, and coordinating with VA representatives to improve access to services. Her newfound passion didn't go unnoticed. The local community college offered her a partial scholarship after hearing about her efforts. Sarah found herself juggling her diner shifts with evening classes in social work, her eyes set on a future where she could make an even bigger difference. Jack's transformation was equally profound. The man who had once shied away from human contact now stood tall, but as a mentor to younger vets struggling with the transition to civilian life. One evening, as Sarah was closing up the diner, she found Jack waiting for her, a nervous energy about him. "I've got news," he said, a mix of excitement and apprehension in his voice. "Remember that job offer from the construction company? I think I'm going to take it." Sarah's face lit up with joy. "Jack, that's wonderful." He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's scary as hell, but I think I'm ready. And, well, I couldn't have done it without you, kid." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "You did this, Jack. You had the courage all along. You just needed a reminder." As they stood there, the setting sun casting long shadows across the diner's parking lot, Sarah realized how far they'd both come. From a chance encounter born of compassion, they had not only changed each other's lives, but had set in motion a wave of change that was rippling through their entire community. The journey ahead was still long, with challenges yet to face. But in that moment, standing side by side, Sarah and Jack felt ready to take on whatever came next, together. The town hall was packed to capacity. A sea of faces turned expectantly towards the podium. Sarah stood off to the side, her heart racing as she watched Jack make his way to the front. Gone was the disheveled man she'd met months ago. In his place stood a figure of quiet dignity, his military jacket pressed and adorned with the medals he'd earned, but had long kept hidden. As Jack began to speak, a hush fell over the crowd. His voice, once hesitant, now rang clear and strong. He spoke of his experiences in war, the friends he'd lost, and the battles he'd continued to fight long after returning home. But more than that, he spoke of hope, the hope that had been rekindled by a simple act of kindness from a young waitress. "We often talk about the cost of war," Jack said, his eyes scanning the audience. "But we rarely discuss the cost of coming home. It's not just about physical wounds or PTSD. It's about feeling lost in a world that seems to have moved on without you. It's about struggling to find your place, your purpose." Sarah felt tears welling up as she listened. She saw heads nodding in agreement, saw veterans in the audience straightening in their seats, recognition and relief in their eyes. Jack continued, "But what I've learned, what Sarah helped me remember, is that we're not alone. Our strength lies not just in what we've endured, but in our ability to come together, to support each other, to rebuild." As Jack finished his speech, the room erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, many wiping away tears. Sarah watched as veterans approached Jack, shaking his hand, sharing quiet words of thanks. The mayor took the podium next, announcing a series of new initiatives inspired by Jack and Sarah's story. Increased funding for veteran support programs, job training initiatives, and a community outreach program to identify and assist homeless veterans. As the meeting concluded, Sarah found herself surrounded by people eager to get involved, to volunteer, to make a difference. In that moment, looking at the hope and determination on the faces around her, Sarah realized that this was just the beginning. What had started as a simple act of kindness had grown into a movement, a community-wide commitment to ensuring that no veteran would be left behind. Jack made his way through the crowd to Sarah's side. "We did it, kid," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. Sarah smiled, linking her arm through his. "No, Jack, we're just getting started." As they walked out of the town hall together, into a future bright with possibility, Sarah knew that their story, a tale of compassion, resilience, and the power of human connection, would continue to inspire change for years to come. In the weeks following the town hall meeting, Sarah and Jack found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about their journey, catapulting their cause into the national spotlight. Suddenly, interview requests from major news networks began pouring in, and social media was abuzz with their story. Sarah, still balancing her diner shifts and college classes, felt both exhilarated and overwhelmed. One morning, as she was pouring coffee for the regulars, her phone buzzed with a notification. A popular talk show wanted to feature them in a segment about community heroes. "Jack," she called out, rushing over to his usual booth. "You're not going to believe this." Jack looked up from his newspaper, a bemused expression on his face. "What's got you all fired up this time?" "Kid," as Sarah explained the invitation, she saw a flicker of uncertainty cross Jack's face. "I don't know about all this publicity," he said, his voice low. "It's not why we started this." Sarah sat down across from him, her expression softening. "I know, Jack. But think about how many more veterans we could help if we share our story. It's not about us. It's about the cause." After a moment of contemplation, Jack nodded. "All right, I'm in, but you're doing most of the talking." The day of the interview arrived, and as they sat under the bright studio lights, Sarah felt a surge of pride as Jack, initially nervous, began to open up about his experiences. His words, raw and honest, touched hearts across the nation. Back home, the effects were immediate. Donations poured in for the local veteran support programs. Businesses reached out, offering job opportunities specifically for veterans. The mayor's office was flooded with calls from other cities, asking for advice on implementing similar initiatives. As Sarah walked through town, she noticed subtle but significant changes. The park where homeless veterans once gathered was now the site of a weekly support group meeting. The diner had become a hub for veteran outreach, with a bulletin board covered in job postings and resource information. One evening, as they sat in the diner after closing, Jack turned to Sarah. "You know, when I first came in here, I thought my story was over, but you gave me a new chapter." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining. "We gave each other new chapters, Jack, and we're just getting started." As their initiative gained momentum, Sarah and Jack found themselves facing new challenges. The influx of attention and resources brought with it increased scrutiny and expectations. Some questioned whether two individuals with no formal experience in social work or veteran affairs were qualified to lead such a significant movement. Sarah, in particular, felt the weight of these doubts. Balancing her studies, her job at the diner, and her growing responsibilities to the veteran community was taking its toll. One night, after a particularly grueling day of classes followed by a contentious meeting with city officials, she broke down in tears in the diner's back alley. It was Jack who found her there, slumped against the wall. Without a word, he sat down beside her, his presence a comforting anchor. "I don't know if I can do this, Jack," Sarah confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I'm in over my head? What if I let everyone down?" Jack was quiet for a moment, then spoke with a gentleness that belied his gruff exterior. "You know, in the military, you've already done more than most people ever will. But if you want to keep going, to really make a difference, you've got to be ready for the hard days. They're what make the good days worth it." Sarah wiped her eyes, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "How did you get so wise, old man?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. Jack chuckled. "A hard-earned lessons, kid. Now, what do you say we get back in there and show them what we're made of?" As they stood up, brushing off their clothes, Sarah realized that this journey wasn't just about helping veterans. It was about personal growth, about facing challenges head-on, and about the unbreakable bond of friendship forged in the fires of adversity. Together, they walked back into the diner, ready to face whatever came next. The road ahead would be difficult, but with each other's support and the backing of their community, they knew they could weather any storm. As autumn turned to winter, Sarah and Jack's initiative evolved into a full-fledged nonprofit organization, Second Watch, named after the military term for the middle period of guard duty, often the most challenging, but also the most critical. The organization's headquarters was a small, refurbished warehouse on the outskirts of town. On a crisp December morning, Sarah stood in the main room, surveying the space with a mixture of pride and disbelief. Desks lined one wall, staffed by volunteers coordinating various programs. A large community board dominated another wall, covered with job listings, housing opportunities, and upcoming events. Jack entered, stamping snow from his boots. "Place is really shaping up," he remarked, handing Sarah a steaming cup of coffee. "It's amazing," Sarah agreed. "Sometimes I can hardly believe how far we've come." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young man, barely out of his teens, his military haircut growing out. He looked around nervously, clutching a duffel bag. Sarah approached him with a warm smile. "Welcome to Second Watch. I'm Sarah, and this is Jack. What's your name?" "Tom," the young man replied hesitantly. I just got back from my tour. I don't really know where to go from here." Jack stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Tom's shoulder. "You came to the right place, son. We've got your 6. As Jack led Tom to the counseling area, Sarah felt a lump in her throat. This was why they had worked so hard, for moments like these, where they could offer hope and support to those who had given so much. The day unfolded with a flurry of activity. Sarah moved from task to task, helping a veteran navigate the complexities of the VA system, coordinating with local businesses for job placements, and planning an upcoming fundraiser. As evening approached, she found Jack in the small kitchen, brewing a fresh pot of coffee. "Busy day," she remarked, leaning against the counter. Jack nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know, when I was at my lowest, I never thought I'd have a purpose again. But seeing these young vets come in, being able to help them, it's given me something I thought I'd lost." Sarah smiled, understanding completely. "We're not just changing their lives, Jack. They're changing ours too." As they stood there, the smell of coffee filling the air, Sarah realized that Second Watch had become more than just an organization. It was a family, a place of healing and hope, not just for the veterans they served, but for everyone involved. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, blanketing the world in a soft, white silence. Inside Second Watch, the warmth of compassion and camaraderie burned bright, a beacon of hope in the darkness of winter.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.